Join me for a conversation with Laura Kaiser, owner of Woodhaven Editorial, where we break down the editing process, the differences between developmental, copyline, and proof edit, and the value of a manuscript review. My name is Richard Wolf, and this is... Laura, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to people exploring the world of self-publishing, to really kind of demystify the differences between developmental editing, copyline editing, and proof editing. First of all, developmental editing, I'd love to hear kind of your definition of developmental editing.
It's great to be here. So developmental editing it's usually the first step in editing where you're looking at the big picture and you're looking at the structure and substance of a book. So it's assessing things like, does the logic flow? Is this the best way to explain what it is you're trying to get across? Is it a little too much? Do we need to cut out a chapter here and there? Are there gaps? I look for places where something might not be so clear to the reader, or the reader might have questions. Often when someone is an expert in their field, they know all of it. So it's hard for them to think about, exactly what the reader is going to want to hear and what might not be clear. So that's kind of where I come in to say, hey, these questions are going to pop up here and you're really not addressing those. This might be something you want to talk about. Or chapter 7 would work better in front of chapter 4.
It's really fair to call it kind of a 30,000 foot look at the manuscript when you get a hold of it, is what I like to tell people.
I also include an editorial letter, which one thing that can happen in the communication between an editor and an author is that the editor might assume that the author understands certain writing techniques and that they'll be on the same page. So an editor might say, make sure you're showing, not telling here. And they might have the assumption that the author is like, oh, of course, sure, I'll get right on that and fix that up. But sometimes something can be lost in translation there. So what I do is I include an editorial letter that addresses all of the writing techniques that I address in the developmental edit. So if, for example, that is something that can make a book stronger, there will be a section in the editorial letter, which is typically around 20 pages or so, that talks just about that. What is it? How do we do it? Why is it important? How does it help connect with the reader? It really spells it out. So it's kind of a writing manual that is targeted specifically for that author and that book. And it can be used in conjunction with the developmental edit, the inline comments that I've left in the rewriting phase, to help the author to make sure they know exactly what it is we're talking about, where we want that book to go, and how to make the changes that I'm recommending.
What genres really benefit from a developmental edit?
Honestly, I think all genres.
Okay.
I once in a while, a book will come across my desk that doesn't need one. And that's simply because maybe the author has just worked so much on it and maybe had some support in the early stages. It's very rare that a book does not need developmental editing. You certainly want an editor who is honest and will tell you, like, hey, it doesn't need that. It can go straight to copyline editing. But almost always there's some structural work, some clarifying, because you really want to be concise and getting to the point.
Yeah. And one of the things I found in a lot of the work that I've done is fiction books, especially like sci-fi or other fiction books that have really complex storylines, especially need, help with the developmental edit, just to make sure the characters are consistent, the timelines are consistent,
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So that's one thing I've noticed for sure, is really complex storylines can really benefit for sure from a developmental edit.
It's great when an editor focuses on your type of book. I work with nonfiction. And I specialize in business books, memoir, and personal development. So that's my niche. And I have done a lot of books in those genres. So I know what to expect, what works, what people are looking for. I'm tuned into the audience, the target market for those books specifically. And I love them, and it's so fun. And I love to get to know the authors and talk about what they're excited about and how they want to make the world a better place.
And how long does a developmental edit typically take? Let's say, and I know that's kind of a loaded question, but your average kind of 50,000 word manuscript, like how long could you reasonably expect a developmental edit to take?
Usually I give it 3 or 4 weeks, depending on the length of the book and the amount of work that needs to be done, the complexity of it. That's typically what I do, but editors are all different. The next step is the copy line edit.
Okay.
And I combine the two. And what copy line refers to is a line edit and a copy edit. Line edit addresses linguistic things. So is there a good transition between the paragraphs? Do these sentences flow? Is this the best word choice? Are you too verbose? Is it really, is your point coming across clearly in terms of the sentence structure? And also tone. So often it can be a tricky balance for authors, and there are different places an author wants to come in on their tone. So are they being casual? Is this kind of a conversation that we're having over coffee with the reader? Or do they want to seem more like a professor? Are they wanting to come across kind of formal? And if it is casual, well, what's too casual? We don't want to say LOL in the book.
Right.
We're not going to use 3 exclamation points, things like that. So line edit addresses those kinds of things. Copy edit is more the nuts and bolts of writing. It's grammar, punctuation, spelling, typos, what words should be in italics, when, are you using too much bolding, things of that nature.
That's one pass of the manuscript, or is that multiple passes then for the newbies?
It's one round.
Okay.
So I do combine it in one round. So when I get it back to the author, the copy and line is all one thing. One other thing to add is that there's the Chicago Manual of Style, which is for the books that I edit. That is the style guide that we use. And you want to make sure that your book is generally adhering to the guidance in the Chicago Manual of Style. And it's little rules that most people wouldn't know, but when you follow them, it makes your book look much more professional, and it makes you come across as much more believable.
Exactly. And thanks for bringing it up, because I know a lot of first-time authors that I talk to, as they begin and progress into their self-publishing journey, talk about, well, my next door neighbor is a high school English teacher, and, I'll have them edit my book. Or can my aunt, who, used to write for a newspaper 30 years ago, can they edit my book? So I think the answer becomes, can they? Yes. Should they? No, because typically they're not following Chicago Manual Style. So it's they're not editing for the readability of a book. So I think that, thanks for bringing it up. It's a key reason why people want to turn to a book editor, if you will, to look at their manuscripts, because it is different than having, no offense to our high school English teachers out there, right? But they're not editing for a book and the style of a book.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I recently edited a book by a high school English teacher. She had taught for so many years, and she was astounded by things that I found and, directions that I led her in. She was just absolutely amazed by it. The Chicago Manual of Style is a book that's about this thick. It's wild. And editors have education. They should have education in the publishing industry and genres, and what are we looking for, and what are readers expecting, and as well as things like the Chicago Manual of Style, and when is okay to break those rules, because we don't have to follow every single rule, but when we do decide to break one, it needs to be an educated choice.
Right, exactly. And it also needs to be consistent too. If you decide to break a rule for, either dramatic effect or some sort of readability or some sort of feeling that you want to convey in the book, it's got to be consistent throughout the book, which is one of the things you do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I see behind you Boys in the Barracks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, yeah.
You and I worked on together.
Yeah, exactly. And that was quite a long book. It was delightful to work on. And there were situations where we were making a choice. Are we following Chicago all the way?
Mm-hmm.
Or where are we breaking those rules? Because that's a military book and the military has their own style that they use.
Exactly.
And so, we made some choices to allow for that in that situation because of who the target audience is.
Right. So you're really tailoring the manuscript to the reader, the targeted reader,
Exactly.
which is, it's a great point.
So important.
So we've gotten through developmental editing. You've done a copy line edit. Now there's kind of the one that everybody's heard of and is very familiar with, the proof edit. Is it the same editor all the way through this process? Or is there a second set of eyes on it? Kind of let, would-be authors know what they can expect with and what's involved in the proof edit.
In my opinion, essential to have a separate proofreader. It should be a fresh set of eyes because everyone knows that once you've read something over and over and over again, your brain knows what it's supposed to say. You know what you meant. And that becomes true of the editor as well. So once I've done a developmental edit, a copy line edit, I've worked so much with that material and I have blind spots at that point. So I am no longer the best proofreader for that book. And you want someone who's fresh to it and will catch the things that I've missed and, read it how it is written on the page as opposed to read it for what you think it's supposed to say.
Right. And then
so it's really important that the proofreader is separate.
Yeah, there are multiple ways to do this proofing part. And I've worked with some editors who prefer that if a client's working with me, I go out and find a separate proof editor for another set of eyes. There are editors out there that prefer to work with proof editors that they've worked with in the past and have a good working relationship. What could potential authors expect from you in terms of going out to a proof editor? Do they need to seek their own? Do you do that? Are you acting as kind of the key editor here, the lead editor? So when that proof editor is done, is it coming back to you? Is it going directly to the client for final touches? Kind of walk us through that process.
Good question. So I act as the lead editor. It's very important in the earlier stages of editing that the author really has a rapport with the editor. You need to see eye to eye. You need to have the same vision for the book. Proofreader is a little bit different because they simply need to know Chicago. They need to know how commas work. They're just correcting errors. And it's not so much about, do they understand the vision of my book? They just need to fix the errors that remain. And so for that reason, I like to take that one thing off of the author's list of things to do and take care of it myself. And then that way I can work with a proofreader who I've vetted. Because really, someone who knows this world is better able to assess, is this a good proofreader or not?
Right.
And so I work with proofreaders who are established and I know that they do great work. And then that way the author doesn't need to worry about choosing a proofreader.
What about typical timelines for the proof edit then?
That tends to be quicker. I would say for a short to medium length book, a proofreader might take 2 weeks. Those tend to go much more quickly. It's a lot less work. They're looking for errors that have slipped by the previous passes of editing, as well as errors that have been introduced. It's very easy to do. So say you're deleting a word, maybe you accidentally deleted the space before the word as well.
Sure.
And you might not catch that. So that's the final cleanup around. Hopefully we'll catch most of those error.
So one of the things I like to tell authors that I'm working with is we want to let the process takes what the process takes. So we never want to rush, whether it's cover design, interior design, any of the editing steps, the production process, all of those different pieces. We want the process to take what it takes. So when you look at the big picture of editing, what could somebody reasonably expect for a medium size work, 50 to 75,000? I think we're talking a good 3 to 6 months potentially to work through the editing process.
I mean, I would say more of the 6-month
Okay.
window. It's great you bring that up, because I often see authors who are in such a hurry, and I know it's important to keep the momentum. You don't want to lose that, because we all know the people who have a book that they wrote 10 years ago and never really got around to dealing with.
Absolutely.
You don't want that to happen. But at the same time, it takes the time it takes. And so many authors, oh, I have this conference, there's this convention, I'm speaking, it needs to be ready in 2 months. And, yeah, they can do it really quickly, and they're going to miss so many parts of the process that way.
Exactly right.
And, sometimes a developmental edit will go back to the author, and it takes a while for them to do that work, to get it ready for the next step. Sometimes they might say, I still need help. Can you give it an extra read through? You really want to give the process all the time it takes to do it right, because there's so many books out there that just look so unprofessional and can really do the author a disservice.
I am a big fan of manuscript reviews, and I know you are rolling out a new service, and I can't wait to hear about it. So share with me kind of what is a manuscript review for those that don't know, and what's the advantages of doing that with you?
Sure. So sometimes an author is feeling kind of stuck. They've written, they've revised, and they're like, it's just not quite doing what I wanted to do. My book isn't telling the story I need to tell. Maybe it's not engaging. Maybe it's feeling too complicated. There's some issue that they just can't quite get beyond. And because of that, they don't feel it's really ready for a developmental edit. It's not all there. It's not ready to be, say, rearranged and really analyzed closely, but they still need a little assistance with it beyond a beta reader. And so that's where the manuscript evaluation or manuscript review comes into play. It's where I read a book and assess chapter by chapter, what are the strong points, what needs to be strengthened here, what's working and what can be better. And I'll write up an assessment kind of explaining those things to the author and giving them a direction to head in with it. In a manuscript evaluation, I'm not using track changes to leave comments in the margins. I'm not attaching comments to the text saying, hey, this paragraph is confusing. And, really, it's not dealing with the details of the structure. It's more big picture. And, your book will work better if you maybe introduce more stories to make the points that you're making come alive to the reader. It's kind of guidance like that, more big picture writing guidance.
Is it done only with a completed manuscript, or can you do this with folks that are in the process of finishing up a book? Maybe they're stuck on how to close their book out or something like that. So is it kind of a coaching service, or is it just an evaluation of a completed manuscript?
It's usually an evaluation of a completed manuscript, but of course, part of the guidance might be, add this. I would recommend that they might add something or incorporate another element into their book. And if it's missing maybe just the ending or something like that, I would still work with it. But it's not going to be something that's half written or just in kind of outline notes form. That would not be ready for a manuscript evaluation. And that would be more writing coach or a writing group. that author would need.
How do you price out something like that? So what if somebody was interested in doing that? Is it a by the hour thing? Is it by word count? How do you price out an evaluation?
I do all of my pricing by word count, because it's not fair to an author if, say, their book happens to require me to look up a whole lot more details than somebody else's book.
Yep.
And that can also be hard to predict. Say in Boys in the Barracks, I maybe couldn't have predicted before we started that I needed to do quite a bit of military research for it.
Right.
And you never want shifting price point. You want to get that established in the beginning. So the manuscript evaluation is much less expensive than the developmental edit. It's typically around half the price, roughly, of a developmental edit, depending on the book. And what I do with my clients is that the manuscript evaluation, a portion of that cost can, if they want to book the developmental edit with me, will go towards the payment of their developmental edit.
Okay.
Because it is a lot, and I get that.
What can a potential author expect with working for you? In other words, what is kind of your process? And if someone wanted to reach out to you for more information, how do they get in touch with you? Do you do a free consultation initially? Kind of tell me about your process.
I am at wordhaveneditorial.com.
Okay.
And my email is laura@wordhaveneditorial.com.
And I will put all that information in the description below, so people can certainly find you.
Great. And so basically they will fill out a form and I get back to them and set up a Zoom call, usually. Happy to do phone call as well, so that we can just see if we're a good fit and if I think that I would be the best editor for their book. Sometimes something might be a little out of my wheelhouse, and I will help them find an editor who might be better suited. And so the consultation is free. I will also do a sample edit for them, where I take about 4 pages and do an edit, get it back to them so that they have a sense of what's involved. That works very well for the copy line edit. Of course, a developmental edit is much more big picture.
Sure.
And sometimes in the 4 pages, you'll see some comments that are more developmental edit related, but that definitely works for the copy line edit more so. And so at that point, if they want to move ahead, I will give them a proposal. I will assess, I look at the manuscript and see how much work I think it needs, what types of editing it needs, and write up the proposal for them and give them the quote. If they go ahead, they will sign a contract that lays out the dates and exactly what I'm going to do, all of that. Then they're on my schedule. They give me a deposit, which is 50%, in order to be booked on my calendar. Then they get their manuscript to me in Word. It's great to write books in Word. It's great to never have them leave Word.
Yes.
Because as you and I know, something happens when you transfer a manuscript from Word to other programs and back.
The other thing I would tell people out there is leave your fancy formatting off of your manuscript.
Yes.
That's done on interior design. So you don't want to see fancy fonts. You don't want to have them try and lay it out in chapters and do all these crazy things. That's totally for interior design. So how do you like to receive the manuscript then? Is there a particular font? Is it double spaced? Is it single spaced?
Well, I can always change that once I receive it, but I tend to prefer Times New Roman and 1.5 spacing for the line spacing. Yeah. So in terms of my process, then they get the manuscript to me before the start date. They can include any supplemental material. So sometimes they want to send an outline along with it that they've used. If I'm doing a developmental edit, they can send their author bio. I can help them with the back blurb, cover blurb, the dedication, all of that stuff, acknowledgments, I'm happy to help with, and they can include that right from the beginning.
Yep. And so for those of you out there preparing your book, so all of that's known as in the industry as front and back matter. And I always recommend that every one of our authors pass their front and back matter through their editors for sure, because I've seen a lot of back blurbs that you can tell were not edited. So
Yes.
author bios, dedications, acknowledgement, back blurbs, any other, sales pieces, information about other books, et cetera, that you have in a book, please pass those things through your editor.
Exactly. Absolutely. And the back blurbs, that's a great place to get some help, because a lot of people, they want it to be kind of a summary of their book. The book is about X, Y, and Z. You'll love it. But really, it is more of a marketing piece, and it needs to convey to the reader how this will change their life. Is it going to move them emotionally? Are they going to understand something about relationships? Are they going to change the way they do business? Are they going to change something in their own life? So when someone's thinking about making a purchase, they are imagining how their life will be changed by shelling out the money and buying this thing. So that's what you need to really connect with the reader on in the back blurb.
Yep. It's hugely important, and not enough authors put the emphasis on it. They, back in the days when we all used to walk through bookstores, I always say the covers grab the eye, and the back book blurb closes the deal. It makes the person say, I have to take this book home with me today. So yeah, that's
absolutely,
that's great advice for sure. So, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And thanks for kind of demystifying the different types of editing and talking about the importance of each of the step. And most of all, making sure that the process takes the time that it needs because it really truly does give the author the best book possible, which is what both of our jobs is to give the author the best book possible. So I mentioned again, I will put down in the description all the ways you can get a hold of Laura. Please for sure reach out to her and talk to her about your project. It is the best investment in your self-publishing journey that you will make. Laura, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.